The morning sun cast long shadows across the suburban streets of Cedar Falls, Ohio, as I loaded my overnight bag into my Honda Civic. The crisp October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of change that I couldn't have anticipated. My name is Sarah Martinez, and at 28, I thought I had finally found stability living in the family home I'd inherited from my grandmother 3 years prior. "You sure you'll be okay managing everything while I'm gone?" I called out to my younger brother Jake, who was lounging on the front porch, scrolling through his phone with the casual indifference that had become his trademark since moving back in 6 months ago. "Relax, Sarah. It's just 3 days. What could possibly happen?" Jake didn't even look up from his screen, his sandy brown hair falling across his forehead in that deliberately messy way he'd perfected since high school. My sister Emma emerged from the house, coffee mug in hand, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow looked effortlessly chic. At 25, she had that natural beauty that made everything seem easy, though I'd learned that appearances could be deceiving. "We've got this, sis. Go enjoy your conference in Chicago. Network, learn, do all those professional development. Things you love so much," Emma said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I should have paid attention to that smile. I should have noticed the way Jake's leg bounced nervously, or how Emma avoided direct eye contact. But I was distracted by excitement about the marketing conference I'd been looking forward to for months. 3 days of workshops, networking, events, and the chance to finally meet some industry contacts face to face. The 2-hour drive to Chicago gave me time to think about how much my life had changed since Grandma Elena passed away. Inheriting her house had been both a blessing and a responsibility. The cozy 3-bedroom ranch-style home on Maple Street held decades of memories, from childhood summers spent in her garden to the quiet evenings we'd shared in her final months when I'd moved in to care for her. After she died, the house became my anchor. While my siblings had scattered, Jake bouncing between failed business ventures and Emma chasing her dreams of becoming an influencer, I'd found purpose in preserving what Grandma had built. I'd painted the walls, updated the kitchen, and turned the basement into a home office where I ran my freelance marketing consultancy. When Jake lost his apartment due to unpaid rent and Emma's relationship imploded spectacularly, I'd opened my doors to them. "Family helps family," Grandma always said. I just wished she'd also taught me how to recognize when family was taking advantage. The conference exceeded my expectations. 3 days of intensive workshops on digital marketing trends, social media, strategy, and client relationship management. I networked with industry leaders, attended evening socials, and even secured 2 promising leads for new clients. By Sunday evening, as I packed my hotel room, I felt energized and optimistic about the future. The drive home was peaceful, the interstate lit by a stunning sunset that painted the Ohio countryside in shades of gold and crimson. I sang along to my favorite playlist, already planning how I'd implement the new strategies I'd learned. Maybe I'd finally be able to expand my business enough to hire an assistant. I pulled into the driveway just after 9 p.m., noting that both Jake's beat-up Jeep and Emma's leased BMW were gone. Probably out at some Sunday night hangout, I figured. The house was dark except for the porch light, and I felt a familiar sense of peace wash over me as I approached the front door. The first sign something was wrong hit me the moment I stepped inside. The house felt different. Too empty, too hollow. The usual clutter of Jake's gaming equipment wasn't scattered across the living room coffee table. Emma's collection of skincare products wasn't covering the bathroom counter. "Jake? Emma?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the quiet house. No response. I flicked on the lights and began a slow walk through the main floor. Everything looked normal at first glance. The furniture was in place, the kitchen clean, the family photos still hanging on the walls. But there was something sterile about it all, like a model home waiting for inhabitants. My heart began to race as I climbed the stairs to the second floor. Jake's room door stood open, revealing bare walls where his movie posters used to hang. The closet door gaped open, showing empty hangers, Emma's room was the same, stripped bare, with only dust outlines on the dresser where her jewelry box and perfume bottles had been. But it was when I reached my own bedroom that the real horror began. The door was closed, which was odd since I always left it open. My hand trembled slightly as I turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was empty, not just clean, empty, completely, utterly, devastatingly empty. My bed was gone. The antique oak dresser that had belonged to my great-grandmother, gone. The vintage mirror with its ornate silver frame that I'd spent months restoring, gone. The small bookshelf that held my college textbooks and favorite novels, gone. I stood frozen in the doorway, my overnight bag slipping from my numb fingers and hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The sound echoed in the hollow space that had been my sanctuary. Just 3 days ago, my closet doors hung open, revealing empty rods and bare shelves. Every piece of clothing I owned, the professional blazers I'd saved up for, the vintage dresses I'd collected over years of thrift shopping, the sentimental t-shirts from college and family trips, all gone. I stumbled to where my dresser used to stand, falling to my knees on the cold hardwood. This was where I'd kept my jewelry box, the one filled with Grandma's rings and necklaces, pieces that held stories spanning 3 generations. My high school class ring, the pearl earrings I'd worn to my college graduation, the silver locket, with my parents' wedding photo inside, all vanished. The photo albums that documented my entire life, from baby pictures to recent professional headshots, had been stacked on the bottom shelf of my nightstand. Gone. The cedar chest at the foot of my bed, filled with quilts Grandma had made, letters from friends, my diploma, awards from work, gone. Even my childhood teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, who had sat on my bed for 28 years, gone. I don't know how long I knelt there on the empty floor, but eventually, the shock gave way to a desperate need for answers. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands and called Jake. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Emma. Same thing. I called Jake again, then Emma, then Jake again. Nothing. Finally, on my 4th attempt, Emma answered. Sarah. Hey, how was the conference? Her voice was artificially bright, the way it got when she was nervous. Emma. My voice came out as barely a whisper. Where is everything? Silence. Emma, where are my things? Oh, that. Her tone shifted, becoming defensive. Look, we can explain. We're actually at Jake's friend Mike's place right now, celebrating his birthday. We'll be home later and where are my things? More silence. Then I heard muffled voices in the background, as if she was covering the phone to talk to someone else. Okay, look, don't freak out. We had to make some quick decisions while you were gone, and... What decisions? We sold some stuff, but hear us out. Jake had this amazing business opportunity come up, and Emma needed money for her photography equipment, and we knew you'd want to help family, so... The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the hardwood floor. I could hear Emma's voice continuing to make excuses, growing smaller and more distant. I crawled over to pick up the phone, my entire body trembling. You sold my things. It wasn't a question. Sarah, we can explain everything when we get home. We made really good money, and we're going to pay you back, obviously. We just needed... You sold Grandma's dresser. Well, yeah, but Sarah, it was just sitting there, and this antique dealer offered us $1,500 for it, which is way more than... I hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat in the middle of my empty room, surrounded by nothing but dust and the faint outlines on the walls where my pictures used to hang. The weight of betrayal settled into my chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe. They hadn't just taken my belongings. They had erased my life, my history, my connection to the woman who had raised me with love and respect. They had treated my most precious possessions like garage sale items, things that could be converted to cash without a second thought. My phone buzzed with text messages. Jake. Sarah, don't be dramatic. We'll explain everything when we get home. Emma. You're overreacting. It was just stuff. We're family, we help each other out. Jake. We were going to surprise you with how much money we made. Emma. We knew you wouldn't miss most of it anyway. That last message hit me like a physical blow. Wouldn't miss it. They thought I wouldn't miss 28 years of memories, family heirlooms, and everything that made this house feel like home. I turned off my phone and walked downstairs to the kitchen. The refrigerator was empty, except for condiments and a few beer bottles. The pantry had been cleaned out, too. Even my coffee had been sold or taken. I opened the back door and stepped onto the small deck overlooking Grandma's garden. The October night was cold, and I wrapped my arms around myself, wishing I had a sweater, but I didn't have any sweaters anymore. I didn't have anything anymore. The garden was overgrown, neglected, since I'd been too busy with work to maintain it properly. Grandma's prize roses drooped sadly, and weeds had taken over the vegetable patch where she used to grow tomatoes and peppers for her famous salsa. Standing, there in the dark, surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd thought I understood, I made the first of many decisions that would change everything. I wasn't going to beg for explanations. I wasn't going to plead with them to understand why this hurt so much. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I was going to disappear, just like my belongings had. The next morning brought gray skies and a persistent drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I'd spent the night on the living room couch, the only piece of furniture they'd left untouched, probably because it was too old and worn to sell for much. I woke to the sound of car doors slamming and familiar voices carrying across the front yard. Jake and Emma were home, and from the sound of it, they'd brought backup. I'm telling you, she's probably just being emotional. Jake's voice carried through the front door. You know how Sarah gets about sentimental stuff. We just need to explain it the right way, Emma replied. Focus on the opportunities we created with the money. The front door opened, and they walked in like nothing had happened, followed by two people I didn't recognize. A tall guy with a beard who must be Jake's friend Mike, and a woman about Emma's age with short red hair. Sarah! Emma called out with fake cheerfulness. There you are! We brought coffee and donuts to celebrate. I was sitting on the couch, still wearing the clothes I'd traveled home in, my hair unwashed and my eyes probably red from the tears I'd finally allowed myself to cry at 3 a.m. Celebrate what exactly? My voice was calm, which seemed to confuse them. Jake stepped forward, hands in his pockets, trying for his most charming smile. Look, sis, I know this seems bad, but wait until you hear about the business opportunity. Mike here knows this guy who flips vintage furniture, and he offered us serious money for some of the old stuff upstairs. Old stuff. I repeated the words. Slowly. Right. Like that dresser in your room. Do you know how much we got for it? $1,500. And the mirror, another $800. We made almost $5,000 in one weekend. Emma jumped in, her eyes bright with what she probably thought was excitement. And I finally got the camera equipment I needed for my photography business. I booked 3 weddings already. This is going to change everything for us. I stood up, slowly, and something in my movement made them all take a step back. Where are my clothes? Oh, well, we donated most of those to Goodwill, Emma said casually. But Sarah, half of them were so outdated, and you barely wore. My photo albums. Jake shifted uncomfortably. We kept the important ones. The rest were just taking up space. And this woman at the flea market collects vintage photo albums for scrapbooking projects. She paid $50 for Grandma's jewelry. Silence fell over the room like a blanket. Mike and the red-haired woman exchanged uncomfortable glances. That's actually a funny story, Emma said with a nervous laugh. There was this estate jewelry buyer who, get out. The words came out quietly, but with such finality that everyone stopped talking. Sarah, come on, Jake started. Get out of my house. All of you. Now. You're being ridiculous, Emma said, crossing her arms. We're family. We made money for all of us. We can buy you new stuff, better stuff. Get out! The explosion of rage that came out of me surprised everyone, including myself. Jake's friend Mike was already backing toward the door, pulling the red-haired woman with him. We'll just wait in the car, Mike mumbled, and they disappeared. Jake and Emma stood there, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Sarah, you need to calm down, Jake said. This isn't like you. You're right. This isn't like me. The old me would have tried to understand your reasons. The old me would have made excuses for you. The old me would have forgiven you because we're family. I walked to the front door and opened it. But the old me never had her entire life stolen by the people she trusted most. We didn't steal anything, Emma protested. We made executive decisions to help the family financial situation. You should be thanking us. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. Someone who could take 28 years of memories and reduce them to dollars and cents. Someone who could sleep in a house full of someone else's belongings and wake up thinking they'd done a good deed. You have 1 hour to get your things and leave. After that, I'm changing the locks. You can't kick us out. Jake stepped forward aggressively. We live here too. No, you don't. This is my house. Grandma left it to me, not us. You've been guests in my home, and now you're no longer welcome. Emma's face flushed red. Fine. But don't expect us to give you any of the money back. We invested it in our futures, and you can't force us to. I don't want your money. The calmness in my own voice surprised me. I don't want anything from either of you ever again. They left exactly 58 minutes later, loading their remaining possessions into their cars with aggressive efficiency. Emma slammed her car door hard enough to rattle the windows. Jake peeled out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on the asphalt. I watched from the living room window as they drove away, and for the first time in 24 hours, I felt like I could breathe. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not empty. Peaceful. Like a blank canvas waiting for something new to be created. I walked upstairs to my empty bedroom and sat down in the center of the hardwood floor. The late morning sun streamed through the windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the walls. This was rock bottom. Everything I'd owned, everything that connected me to my past, everything that made this house feel like home. Gone. Sold to strangers for grocery money and business ventures that would probably fail within 6 months. But rock bottom, I realized, could also be a foundation. And foundations were meant for building something new. The locksmith arrived at 2 p.m. sharp. A middle-aged man named Bill, who took one look at my empty house and didn't ask questions. There's something liberating about anonymity, about being just another customer with a simple request. Change the locks, make it secure, make it mine again. Should take about an hour, Bill said, kneeling beside the front door with his toolbox. You'll have 3 keys for each lock. Recommend keeping one hidden outside, just in case. I nodded, though I already knew I wouldn't be hiding any spare keys. The people who might have needed emergency access were the same ones I was, locking out. While Bill worked, I sat on my front porch steps and made a list on my phone. Not a list of what I'd lost. That would take days and only make me angrier. Instead, I made a list of what I needed to rebuild. Bed, clothes, basic toiletries, coffee maker, phone charger cord to replace the one Emma had apparently taken. The practical approach kept the overwhelming grief at bay. Emotions were luxuries I couldn't afford right now. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the afternoon. Jake. Sarah, this is insane. We're your family. Emma. Mom and Dad are going to be so disappointed when they hear how you're treating us, Jake. We can work this out like adults. Emma. You're making a huge mistake. I deleted each message without responding and eventually blocked both numbers. Bill finished the locks and handed me 3 shiny new keys. "There you go, miss. Nobody's getting in without your permission now." After he left, I walked through every room of the house, checking windows and doors, reclaiming my space inch by inch. The echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floors no longer sounded hollow. It sounded like possibility. The first stop was Target, where I bought the basics: a pillow, sheets, a blanket, toiletries, and enough clothes to get me through the next few days. The total came to $237, which stung considering my usual careful budgeting, but felt like an investment in my independence. That night, I slept on the living room couch wrapped in my new blanket, my phone charging, next to me, and for the first time since coming home, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. Tuesday morning brought clarity along with the sunrise. I made coffee in the Mr. Coffee maker I'd bought the day before, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, planning my next moves with the systematic approach that had made my marketing consultancy successful. First priority: income stability. I called my 3 biggest clients and explained that I'd had a family emergency, but was back to work and more focused than ever. 2 of them had projects they'd been waiting to discuss, and the third mentioned they'd been hoping to expand their social media presence. Within 2 hours, I'd secured enough work to cover my expenses for the next month. Second priority: rebuilding my living space, but smarter this time. Instead of trying to replace everything I'd lost, I would create something entirely new. Something that reflected who I was becoming, not who I'd been. I spent the morning researching furniture stores, both physical and online. Facebook Marketplace became my hunting ground, filled with people selling quality items at reasonable prices. Estate sales offered the chance to find unique pieces with character. Thrift stores held treasures that just needed someone to see their potential. By afternoon, I'd arranged to buy a gently used queen bed from a couple who was downsizing, a solid wood dining table from an estate sale, and a vintage desk that would be perfect for my home office. The total cost was less than what Jake and Emma had gotten for my grandmother's dresser alone. Wednesday brought my first furniture deliveries. The couple selling the bed, Maria and Robert, helped me carry it upstairs and even offered to help me set it up. They were in their 60s, downsizing to a condo, and they shared stories of their children and grandchildren while we assembled the bed frame. "It's nice to see someone young getting a fresh start," Maria said as she handed me a screwdriver. "There's something brave about starting over." That evening, as I lay in my own bed in my empty but no longer hollow bedroom, I realized Maria was right. This wasn't just about replacing stolen belongings. I was rebuilding myself from the ground up, and this time, every choice was entirely my own. The estate sale on Saturday was an adventure in itself. The Victorian house on Oak Street was filled with a lifetime of memories being dispersed to strangers, and I felt a kinship with the elderly woman supervising the sale. She sat in a folding chair by the front door, watching decades of accumulation find new homes. "That desk belonged to my late husband," she told me as I examined the solid oak piece with its intricate carved details. "He wrote his memoirs on that desk. It's been sitting empty for 2 years now, waiting for someone who would appreciate it." I bought the desk, along with a matching chair and a small bookshelf that would start my library over from scratch. The woman, whose name was Dorothy, insisted on throwing in a box of books she thought I might enjoy. "These are good stories," she said, patting the box. "Stories about people who overcome difficult times. I think you might need them." She was more right than she knew. Setting up my home office in the basement felt like claiming territory. I arranged the desk by the window overlooking the backyard, positioned the bookshelf where it would be easily accessible, and hung a bulletin board where I could track my business goals and client projects. This space was mine, built with my own choices and my own money. The first book I pulled from Dorothy's box was Wild by Cheryl Strayed. I read the first chapter that night and felt a connection to the author's journey of rebuilding herself after loss. Different circumstances, same need to prove that she could survive and thrive on her own terms. Meanwhile, The outside world kept trying to intrude. My phone rang constantly with calls from blocked numbers that I assumed were Jake and Emma trying different phones to reach me. I let them all go to voicemail and deleted the messages without listening. My mother called on Sunday morning, her voice tight with disapproval. Sarah Elizabeth Martinez, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this behavior is completely unacceptable. I'd been expecting this call since Emma's text about telling our parents. Mom had always been protective of Jake and Emma, the younger siblings who seemed to need more help, more understanding, more second chances. Hi, Mom. Hi, Mom, me. Emma called me crying yesterday, saying you threw them out of the house over some misunderstanding about belongings. She said you were being completely unreasonable. Is that what she told you? She said you went crazy over some old furniture and threw your own family out on the street. Sarah, I raised you better than this. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Mom, did Emma tell you that they sold everything I owned while I was at a work conference? Did she mention that they sold Grandma's dresser, her jewelry, my photo, albums, my clothes, everything, without asking me? Silence on the other end. Did she tell you that they sold 28 years of my memories to fund Jake's latest business scheme and Emma's photography equipment? Well, she said they made some decisions to help the family financially, and that you were being ungrateful. They sold Grandma's jewelry, Mom. Her wedding ring, the necklace Grandpa gave her for their anniversary, the earrings she wore to your wedding. They sold them to strangers. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Surely you're exaggerating. They sold my diploma, my baby pictures, the quilt Grandma made for my college graduation. They cleaned out my entire life and turned it into cash, and when I came home to an empty room, Emma told me I was overreacting because it was just stuff. The silence stretched longer this time. Sarah? My mother's voice was quieter now. Are you sure? Maybe there was some miscommunication. I'm sure, Mom. And I'm also sure that I'm done making excuses for them. I'm done being the responsible one who cleans up their messes and pretends their selfishness is just immaturity. They're your family. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't destroy each other's lives for convenience. We talked for another 20 minutes, my mother wavering between defending my siblings and slowly accepting the reality of what they'd done. By the end of the call, she wasn't taking their side anymore, but she wasn't ready to take mine either. I just want my family to get along, she said finally. So do I, Mom. But getting along doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. After hanging up, I realized something important. I felt lighter. For years, I'd carried the weight of being the stable one, the reliable one, the one who held everything together. I'd made my siblings' problems my problems, their emergencies my crises. Now, for the first time in my adult life, I was responsible only for myself. And I was discovering that I was much stronger than I'd ever known. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Work during the day, building my client base and developing new services. Evenings spent slowly furnishing my house, choosing each piece carefully based on my own taste rather than what was practical or what others might prefer. I found a vintage velvet armchair at a thrift store that was perfect for reading. I bought plants, lots of plants, to bring life into the spaces that had felt so empty. I hung artwork that spoke to me, abstract pieces that captured movement and growth, photographs of landscapes that suggested endless possibilities. The house began to feel like mine in a way it never had before. Not just legally mine, but emotionally mine. Every corner reflected a choice I'd made, a vision I'd pursued, a step forward rather than backward. I started taking evening walks through the neighborhood, something I'd never had time for when I was managing 3 adults' worth of problems in addition to my work. The autumn air was crisp and energizing, and I found myself noticing details I'd overlooked for years. The intricate woodwork on the Victorian houses, the way the light fell through the mature oak trees, the sound of families having dinner with their windows open. One evening, about 3 weeks after changing the locks, I was walking past the park on Elm Street when I noticed a woman about my age sitting alone on a bench, sketching the sunset. Something about her focused concentration reminded me of myself in those early days of rebuilding, so intent on creating something new that the rest of the world fell away. "That's beautiful," I said as I approached, gesturing to her drawing. She looked up and smiled, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Thanks. I'm trying to capture the way the light changes this time of year. I'm Jessica, by the way." "Sarah. I live over on Maple Street." "Oh, you're in the blue house with the amazing garden. I've walked past it so many times and admired the potential it has." We talked for 20 minutes about art, neighborhoods, and the meditative quality of creative work. Jessica was a graphic designer who'd recently moved to Cedar Falls to be closer to her aging parents, and she understood the complexity of family relationships and personal independence. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" she asked as we prepared to part ways. I'm always looking for good conversation with someone who appreciates creativity. I'd love that. Walking home that evening, I realized I'd just done something I hadn't done in months. Made a new friend based purely on mutual interest and enjoyment of each other's company. Not someone connected to work or family obligations, just a person who seemed interesting and kind. It was a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. My phone still rang occasionally with blocked numbers, and I still deleted the voicemails without listening. But the urgent desperation I'd felt in those first days was fading, replaced by something steadier and more sustainable. Contentment with my own company and pride in what I was building. 1 month after the locks were changed, I stood in my bedroom, now furnished with pieces I'd chosen, decorated with artwork I loved, organized exactly the way I wanted it, and took a photo. Not for social media or to show anyone else, but for myself. Evidence of what was possible when you refused to accept unacceptable treatment. The woman in the mirror looked different than she had a month ago. Stronger, more certain, less apologetic for taking up space in her own life. Outside, Grandma's garden was entering its winter dormancy, but I'd already been researching what to plant in the spring. Not the same vegetables she'd grown, but something that honored her, memory while reflecting my own interests and needs. Maybe herbs for cooking, flowers for cutting, vegetables I actually enjoyed eating. Everything was going to be different, and for the first time in my adult life, that felt like a promise rather than a threat. 3 months into my new life, I woke up on a snowy February morning to find my business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. The combination of focused energy and genuine passion for my work had attracted clients who appreciated professionalism and reliability. My client roster had doubled, and I was finally making enough money to feel financially secure, rather than just scraping by. The snow outside created a peaceful blanket over Cedar Falls, muffling the usual sounds of traffic and giving the world a clean, fresh appearance that matched how I felt inside. I made my morning coffee, a ritual I'd come to cherish, and settled at my desk to review the week's projects. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, who'd become one of my closest friends over the past few months. Coffee date at 2 p.m.? "I have news to share." Jessica had become my anchor in the social world I was rebuilding. We met weekly for coffee, attended art shows together, and spent long evenings talking about everything from business strategies to family dynamics. She was the first person I'd told the complete story of what Jake and Emma had done, and her outrage on my behalf had been both validating and healing. Absolutely. Can't wait to hear your news. The morning flew by as I worked on a comprehensive social media strategy for a local restaurant chain. The owners, Maria and Tony Castellano, had hired me after seeing the work I'd done for another client, and their enthusiasm for growing their business matched my energy for helping them succeed. At exactly 2 p.m., I walked into Grind Coffee, our usual meeting spot in downtown Cedar Falls. The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd transitioning to afternoon coffee drinkers, creating a background hum of conversation and the pleasant sounds of espresso machines and ceramic mugs. Jessica was already at our favorite corner table, practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore the vintage band t-shirt and jeans that had become her signature look. "Okay, I can't contain this anymore," she said before I'd even fully sat down. "I got the job." "Which job?" I asked, though her excitement was already making me smile. "The art director position at Morrison Creative, the one I interviewed for last week. They called this morning and offered me the job. Plus, it's a 20% salary increase from my freelance income." I reached across the table and grabbed her hands. "Jessica, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "It gets better. They specifically mentioned that they were impressed by my portfolio, especially the recent work I've been doing. You know, the stuff I've been creating since I moved here and started, living my authentic life instead of trying to please everyone else." Her words hit deeper than she probably realized. Jessica's journey had parallels to mine. She'd moved to Cedar Falls partly to escape a complicated family situation, where she'd been expected to sacrifice her own goals to support her siblings' choices. "When do you start?" "Next Monday. I'm terrified and excited and grateful all at once." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "Sarah, I don't think I would have had the confidence to even apply for this job if I hadn't watched you rebuild your entire life from scratch. You showed me what it looks like to choose yourself without apology." We spent the next hour celebrating her success and planning how she'd navigate the transition from freelance to full-time employment. But as we talked, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just 3 months. The woman who'd knelt on her empty bedroom floor in October, devastated by betrayal, had evolved into someone who could inspire others to pursue their dreams. The isolation I'd initially felt had transformed into intentional solitude that allowed for growth and self-discovery. Walking home from coffee, I noticed the "for sale" sign in front of the Hendersons' house across the street. They were an elderly couple who'd lived there for 40 years, and Mrs. Henderson had mentioned last month that they were considering moving to a retirement community. The house was a charming craftsman-style bungalow with original hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves that I'd always admired. The yard was smaller than mine, but beautifully maintained with mature flowering trees that would be gorgeous in spring. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and called the number on the sign. "Hi, I'm calling about the house on Maple Street. I live across the street, and I'm wondering if you could tell me more about it." 20 minutes later, I was standing in the Hendersons' living room, listening to Mrs. Henderson share stories about raising 3 children in the house, while Mr. Henderson pointed out the updates they'd made over the decades. New roof in 2018, updated electrical in 2020, refinished hardwood floors throughout. "We love this house," Mrs. Henderson said wistfully, "but it's getting too big for us to maintain, and we want to move closer to our grandchildren." The asking price was reasonable for the current market, and the house had been meticulously maintained. As I walked through the rooms, I found myself imagining the possibilities. The extra bedroom could be a proper office. The finished basement would be perfect for a client meeting space. The large kitchen would be ideal for entertaining. "Would you be interested in a quick sale?" I asked, surprising myself with the boldness of the question. "We'd prefer it," Mr. Henderson replied. "We'd rather sell to someone who appreciates what we've built here than wait months for the highest bidder." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with financial documents spread out before me, calculating numbers that seemed almost impossible. My business income had grown substantially. My credit score was excellent, and I'd been saving aggressively since October. The down payment would require most of my savings, but the monthly mortgage payment would actually be less than what I was currently spending on utilities and maintenance for Grandma's larger house. More importantly, I realized I was ready for this step, not just financially, but emotionally. I was ready to choose a home based on what I wanted, rather than what I'd inherited or what circumstances had forced upon me. I called the Hendersons the next morning and made an offer. By Friday, We'd reached an agreement. I would buy their house, and they would have 6 weeks to finalize their move to the retirement community. The timing was perfect. It would give me time to prepare my current house for sale, while arranging the logistics of moving across the street. Jessica was the first person I told, and her reaction was everything I could have hoped for. "Sarah, this is huge. You're not just rebuilding, you're completely transforming your life, and the symbolism of it, moving across the street, literally changing your perspective on the same neighborhood, it's perfect." That weekend, I called a real estate agent to discuss listing Grandma's house. Linda Morrison was a woman in her 50s who'd been selling homes in Cedar Falls for 20 years, and she had a reputation for honesty and efficiency. "This is a lovely property," Linda said as we walked through the rooms I'd been slowly furnishing over the past months. "Good bones, well-maintained, nice lot. The market is strong right now for houses in this price range." We discussed listing price, staging, and timeline. Linda suggested a few minor improvements that would help the house show better, but overall, she was optimistic about a quick sale. "Can I ask why you're selling?" Linda said as we stood in the living room where I'd spent so many evenings reading and planning my new life. "I'm ready for something that's completely mine," I said. "This house has a lot of history, and I've loved living here, but I want to create new memories somewhere else." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Sometimes we outgrow places, even places we love." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I hired painters to touch up the walls, organized a deep cleaning service, and began the process of packing my carefully chosen belongings. Each item that went into boxes represented a deliberate choice I'd made during my rebuilding phase, and I felt proud of the life I'd created. Meanwhile, my business continued to thrive. The restaurant chain project led to referrals from other local businesses, and I found myself booking clients weeks in advance. I hired a part-time assistant, a recent college graduate named Marcus, who had impressive social media skills, and the kind of enthusiasm that reminded me of myself when I was starting out. "I can't believe how much your business has grown," Marcus said one afternoon as we reviewed the client calendar. "What changed? I mean, what made everything take off like this?" I thought about his question as I organized files on my laptop. What had changed? On the surface, it seemed like the same work I'd been doing before October, but the energy behind it was completely different. I think I stopped trying to please everyone and started focusing on doing excellent work for the right clients, I said finally. "When you're not worried about being abandoned or needing to prove your worth, you can be more selective and do better work." Marcus nodded, scribbling notes in his ever-present notebook. "That makes sense. You're not desperate for any client. You can choose the ones where you'll do your best work." Exactly. One evening in mid-March, as I was packing books in my soon-to-be former bedroom, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Usually, I let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something made me answer this one. "Is this Sarah Martinez?" The voice was unfamiliar. Female, probably middle-aged. "Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Patricia Williams. I bought some jewelry from your brother and sister a few months ago, and I've been trying to reach you." My heart stopped. Jake and Emma had sold Grandma's jewelry to this woman. "I'm sorry," Patricia continued. "I hope you don't mind that I tracked down your number through mutual acquaintances. Your siblings told me the jewelry belonged to their grandmother, and they were selling it because they needed money for family medical expenses. Of course, they had lied about the reason. After I bought the pieces, I had them appraised for insurance purposes, and the jeweler told me some interesting stories about the history of the pieces. Apparently, your grandmother was quite well known in the community for her volunteer work, and these pieces had been in your family for generations." I sat down heavily on my bed, unsure where this conversation was going. "The reason I'm calling is that I don't feel right keeping jewelry that obviously has such significant family history. Your siblings may have had the legal right to sell it, but morally, well, I'd like to return it to you." I was quiet for so long that Patricia asked if I was still there. "I'm here," I managed. This is unexpected." I understand. I have 3 adult children of my own, and I know family dynamics can be complicated. But I also know what it's like to lose precious family heirlooms, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try to make this right. We arranged to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop downtown. Patricia turned out to be a kind woman in her early 60s who collected vintage jewelry as a hobby. She'd brought a small velvet pouch containing Grandma's wedding ring, the pearl necklace that had been my great-grandmother's, and the silver locket with my parents' wedding photo. "I paid your siblings $800 for these pieces," Patricia said, placing the pouch carefully on the table between us. "The appraiser told me they're worth at least twice that, possibly more because of their provenance and condition." I opened the pouch with trembling fingers. There they were. The pieces I'd thought were lost forever. The tangible connections to women who'd shaped my life and values. "I can't ask you to just give these back," I said. "You paid for them in good faith." "You're not asking. I'm offering. But if it would make you feel better, you could make a donation to a charity your grandmother would have supported. I'd rather see these pieces back with their family than sitting in my jewelry box." I looked across the table at this woman who had no obligation to do the right thing, but was doing it anyway. "Are there more people like you in the world than I realized?" Patricia smiled. "I think there are. We just don't usually have occasions to show it." I made a donation to the food bank where Grandma had volunteered for 15 years, and Patricia handed over the jewelry that connected me to 3 generations of strong women. That evening, I sat in my new house. The closing had happened the week before. Wearing Grandma's ring and looking through the windows at the house where I'd learned to stand up for myself. The contrast was stark. 5 months ago, I'd been living in someone else's space, managing other people's problems, accepting unacceptable treatment because it was easier than setting boundaries. Now I was sitting in a home I'd chosen, wearing jewelry that represented my heritage, surrounded by evidence of my own strength and capability. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Jake. I know you blocked our numbers, but I really need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere neutral?" I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. 5 months ago, I would have responded immediately, eager to hear explanations and apologies, desperate to repair the relationship even, at the cost of my own dignity. But 5 months ago, I'd been a different person. I deleted the message without responding and went back to arranging my books on the built-in shelves in my new living room. Some chapters of life needed to stay closed for the new ones to fully unfold. The spring weather arrived early that year, and with it came the final pieces of my transformation. I planted the herb garden I'd been dreaming about, started hosting small dinner parties for my growing circle of friends, and booked my calendar with clients who appreciated quality work and paid accordingly. One evening in April, as I was watering my herbs on the back patio, I noticed movement in the yard of my former house. A young couple was walking around with a real estate agent, pointing at different features and talking animatedly about possibilities. Linda had told me we had multiple offers within the first week of listing, and I'd accepted one from a couple who were first-time homebuyers. They'd written a letter about their excitement to start their life together in the house, and something about their enthusiasm reminded me of the hope I'd felt when I first inherited it. The house would be loved again, but by people who saw it as a beginning rather than a burden. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my mother, and this time I answered. "Hi, Mom." "Sarah, honey, how are you? I've been thinking about you a lot lately." We talked for an hour about my new house, my growing business, and the changes in my life. Mom was careful not to mention Jake and Emma directly, but I could sense questions lurking beneath her words. "You sound happy," she said finally. "Really happy, not just okay." "I am happy, Mom. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my own life instead of managing everyone else's. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. It took me a while to understand what really happened last fall. But I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled everything." After we hung up, I realized that forgiveness doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like accepting that people showed you who they were and choosing to build your life around that knowledge rather than around hope that they'll change. As the sun set over my neighborhood, the same streets I'd walked for years, but viewed now from a different angle, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life that finally fit properly. Like clothes tailored specifically for you rather than altered hand-me-downs that never quite looked right. I was ready for whatever came next. 2 years had passed since that devastating October evening when I'd walked into my empty bedroom. 2 years of rebuilding, growing, and discovering what life looked like when you refused to accept less than you deserved. The woman I'd become barely resembled the people-pleasing, boundaryless person I'd been before. My business, Martinez Marketing Solutions, now occupied a small office downtown and employed 3 full-time staff members. We specialized in helping family-owned businesses develop authentic digital marketing strategies, and our client retention rate was the highest in the region. The work felt meaningful because I understood what it meant to build something from scratch with integrity and determination. Jessica had become not just my best friend, but my business partner. Her promotion to art director had led to collaboration opportunities between our companies, and together we'd created marketing campaigns that were winning regional awards and attracting clients from neighboring states. I was sitting in my home office on a Friday evening in September, reviewing the week's accomplishments and planning the following week's priorities, when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see 2 familiar figures standing on my front porch, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Jake and Emma. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd seen them in person, though I'd heard updates through family channels. Jake's amazing business opportunity from October 2023 had failed within 6 months, as I'd predicted. He'd moved back in with our parents and was currently working at a local gym while trying to launch some kind of online fitness coaching program. Emma's photography business had shown initial promise, but had struggled to find consistent clients, and she'd recently taken a part-time job at a portrait studio to pay her bills. I watched them through the window for a moment, noting how different they looked. Jake had gained weight and lost the cocky confidence that used to radiate from his posture. Emma's carefully curated social media appearance had given way to someone who looked tired and less certain of herself. They were both staring at my house, really looking at it, perhaps for the first time. The landscaping I'd invested in was mature now, creating a welcoming but clearly well-maintained appearance. The new paint, updated fixtures, and thoughtful decorative touches made it obvious that someone with both resources and good taste lived here. My car in the driveway was newer than what I'd been driving when they knew me. Not flashy, but reliable, and well-maintained. Everything about my home's exterior communicated stability and success. I could have pretended not to be home. I could have ignored the doorbell and waited for them to leave. 2 years ago, I might have been tempted to avoid the confrontation entirely, but I was curious. What could possibly have motivated them to show up at my door after all this time? I opened the door and stood in the doorway, not inviting them in, not stepping outside. Neutral territory. Hello? Sarah. Emma spoke first, her voice smaller than I remembered. Thank you for opening the door. We weren't sure you would, Jake added, shoving his hands deeper into his jacket pockets. What do you want? The directness of my question seemed to catch them off guard. They exchanged glances, and I could see them realizing that this conversation wasn't going to follow the script they'd probably rehearsed. We wanted to talk to you, Emma said. To explain some things and to apologize. We've been wanting to reach out for months, Jake added. But we weren't sure how. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. The evening air was cool, with the first hint of autumn that always reminded me of that life-changing October 2 years ago. Okay, I'm listening. Emma took a shaky breath. Sarah, we know what we did was wrong. We knew it at the time, but we told ourselves it was okay because we were family, and we thought you'd understand eventually. We were desperate. Jake jumped in. I had this business opportunity that required immediate investment, and Emma needed equipment for her photography. And we panicked when we couldn't get loans or credit. So you stole from me. We didn't think of it as stealing, Emma said quickly. We thought of it as borrowing against future success. We were going to pay you back with interest once our businesses took off. I studied their faces, looking for signs of the manipulation and self-justification I'd grown so accustomed to. But what I saw instead was something I'd never seen from them before. Genuine shame. What changed? I asked. Everything, Jake said simply. The business failed. Emma's photography struggled. We had to move back in with Mom and Dad, and they were disappointed doesn't even cover it. They made us explain exactly what we'd done, Emma continued. Not just the selling your stuff part, but all of it. The lying, the minimizing, the way we treated you when you confronted us. Mom cried, Jake said quietly. I'd never seen her cry like that. She said she was ashamed of how she raised us. Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. And then we started hearing about how well you were doing. Your business, this house, the way you'd completely rebuilt your life. People in town talk about you, Sarah. They talk about you as an example of what's possible when someone works hard and treats people right. It made us realize what we'd lost, Jake said. Not just your forgiveness, but your respect, and our own self-respect. I was quiet for a long moment, processing their words. 2 years ago, this conversation would have immediately led to tearful reconciliation, promises to do better, and me welcoming them back into my life with open arms. But I'd learned the difference between remorse and regret. Remorse was about understanding the harm you'd caused and committing to different behavior. Regret was about wishing you hadn't faced consequences for your choices. What do you want from me? I asked. We want to make it right, Emma said. We know we can't undo what we did, but we want to try to fix what we can. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. We've been saving money for over a year. It's not everything. We'll probably never be able to replace the sentimental value of what we sold, but it's what we could gather. I took the envelope but didn't open it. There's $4,200 in there, Emma said. It's not nearly enough, but it's everything we could save while still paying Mom and Dad rent and covering our basic expenses. We also, Jake hesitated, then continued. We tracked down some of the people who bought your things. Most of them were sold at flea markets or to strangers, but we found a few pieces. Emma pulled a small box from her purse. We found the woman who bought your jewelry box. She still had it, and when we explained the situation, she sold it back to us for what she paid, and we found one of your photo albums at an antique store downtown. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the box. There was the carved wooden jewelry box my father had given me for my 16th birthday, and beneath it, a photo album from my college years that I'd thought was lost forever. We know it's not much, Jake said, and we know it doesn't fix anything, but we wanted you to know that we've spent the last 2 years thinking about what we destroyed, and we're sorry. Really, truly sorry. I looked at my siblings, really looked at them, and saw something I'd never seen before. They weren't asking me to fix their problems or manage their emotions. They weren't making excuses or minimizing their actions. They were simply acknowledging the harm they'd caused and trying to make what amends they could. Why now? I asked. Because we finally understood, Emma said. We understood what we'd lost when we lost you. Not just our sister, but someone who believed in us, supported us, and loved us unconditionally. We threw that away for money that didn't even last 6 months. And because we wanted you to know that your response to what we did, the way you handled it, the way you rebuilt, the way you refused to let us drag you down, it taught us something about dignity that we'd never learned before, Jake added. was quiet for a long time, holding the jewelry box and feeling the weight of 2 years of growth and change. These were the people who had devastated me, who had reduced my life to dollars and cents, who had prioritized their immediate wants over my deepest needs. But they were also my siblings, standing on my porch with genuine remorse and evidence of hard-won maturity. "I forgive you," I said finally. The relief that washed over their faces was immediate and profound. "But," I continued, "forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I forgive you because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. I forgive you because I understand that desperation can make people do terrible things. I forgive you because you've clearly learned from the consequences of your choices." Their expressions shifted, hope mixing with uncertainty. "However," I continued, "I won't be welcoming you back into my life the way things were before. You showed me who you were when you thought there would be no consequences. I believe you're genuinely sorry, and I believe you've grown from this experience. But I also believe that people don't fundamentally change." "Sarah," Emma started. "Let me finish. I've built a life based on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and authentic relationships. I've surrounded myself with people who value what I value and treat me the way I deserve to be treated. I won't compromise that for anyone, including family." Jake nodded slowly. "We understand. We don't deserve another chance, and we're not asking for one. We just wanted you to know that we're sorry, and that we recognize what we lost." "What we threw away," Emma corrected. "Nobody took it from us. We threw it away." I opened the envelope and looked at the money inside. $4,200 represented significant sacrifice for 2 people struggling to rebuild their own lives. It wouldn't replace what I'd lost, but it demonstrated commitment to making amends. "I'm going to donate this money to the food bank where Grandma volunteered," I said. "In her memory, and in memory of the family we used to be." They both nodded, accepting my decision without argument. "Thank you for bringing back these pieces," I said, holding up the jewelry box. "And thank you for apologizing. It means more than you probably know. Can we—" Emma hesitated. "Would it be okay if we sent you a Christmas card? Or a birthday card? We don't expect responses, but we'd like you to know that we think about you." I considered the request. Cards would be fine, but no phone calls, no visits, no attempts to insert yourselves back into my life. I need you to respect the boundaries I'm setting. "We will," Jake said quickly. "We respect everything you've built, Sarah. We respect who you've become." They turned to leave, then Emma looked back. "For what it's worth, we're proud of you. We're proud of what you accomplished after what we did. You became everything we should have been." After they left, I sat in my living room holding the jewelry box and photo album, processing the conversation that had just taken place. 2 years ago, I would have invited them in, made coffee, and spent hours trying to rebuild the relationship immediately. Instead, I'd maintained my boundaries. While acknowledging their growth, I'd forgiven them without compromising my own well-being. I'd treated them with dignity while protecting the life I'd worked so hard to build. The next morning, Jessica came over for our weekly coffee and planning session. I told her about the visit, showing her the returned items and explaining the conversation. "How do you feel about it?" she asked, curling up in the armchair by the window with her mug. "Peaceful," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of the answer. 2 years ago, that conversation would have wrecked me emotionally for weeks. Last night, I felt calm, like I handled it exactly the way I needed to. You did. You showed them grace without compromising your standards. That's incredibly mature. I thought about Jessica's words as I went about my weekend routine. I'd maintain my boundaries not out of spite or revenge, but out of self-respect and hard-won wisdom. I'd forgiven them not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the burden of resentment. On Monday morning, I drove to the food bank and made the donation in Grandma's memory. The director, Mrs. Chen, had known Grandma well and was touched by the gesture. "Your grandmother would be proud of the woman you've become," she said, as we discussed the programs the donation would support. "She always said you had the strongest character of all her grandchildren." Walking out of the food bank that morning, I realized that the story that had started with devastating betrayal had become something entirely different. A story about discovering your own strength, building a life that reflects your values, and learning that self-respect isn't negotiable. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, reminding me about the staff meeting that afternoon where we'd be discussing our biggest client presentation of the year. I had work to do, a business to run, and a life to live. A life I'd built from scratch with intention and integrity. The woman who had once knelt on an empty bedroom floor, devastated by betrayal, had become someone who could face her betrayers with calm dignity and clear boundaries. The woman who had once defined herself by her relationships with others had learned to define herself by her own values and choices. That evening, I sat in my herb garden as the sun set, surrounded by plants I'd chosen and nurtured, in a home I'd selected and shaped, living a life I'd designed from the ground up. The scent of basil and rosemary filled the air, and I could hear the sounds of my neighbors enjoying their own evening routines. I thought about the email I'd received that afternoon from a potential client, a family business looking for help, rebuilding their brand after a public relations crisis. They'd heard about my work and specifically requested my services because, as they put it, we need someone who understands how to rebuild trust and create something stronger than what came before. I'd agreed to meet with them next week, knowing that their story would be different from mine, but recognizing the universal themes of resilience, rebuilding, and the choice to create something better from the wreckage of what was. The jewelry. Bach sat on my dresser upstairs, holding new pieces I'd chosen over the past 2 years, pieces that reflected my current taste and the relationships I'd built with people who valued what I valued. The photo album would join others on my bookshelf, part of the history I'd preserved while building a future that belonged entirely to me. Sometimes the greatest act of forgiveness is refusing to return to patterns that diminished you. Sometimes the deepest form of love is maintaining boundaries that protect what you've worked so hard to build. As I locked my doors that night, locks that had been changed 2 years ago and never regretted, I felt the profound satisfaction of a life, lived on my own terms. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had instead become the catalyst for becoming the person I was always meant to be. I'd learned that family doesn't have the right to treat you badly just because you share DNA. I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or returning to toxic patterns. I'd learned that the opinions of people who don't respect you don't have to influence your decisions. Most importantly, I'd learned that self-respect isn't selfish. It's the foundation of every healthy relationship you'll ever have, including the one with yourself. The next morning brought new projects, new possibilities, and the continued unfolding of a life built on the unshakable foundation of knowing exactly what I would and wouldn't accept from the world. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything they could have ever given back.